Okay. On the first page, in the second paragraph, there is a reference to the fact that the decedent had been taking an afternoon nap at 1630 hours with Maria when the phone rang, and that, according to the synopsis, Maria had called for the descendant to come to the phone. As far as I'm concerned, when I was on the phone, I never heard Maria call out to her husband, Murray, to come to the phone at all. So that was the first inaccuracy.
Based on what you heard when you called the first and second times, would it have even been possible for someone to be asleep throughout the ruckus that you heard?
It would seem to me that it would be completely implausible to believe that anyone was asleep, especially the person that had answered the phone, because of the manner in which she answered the phone and the hysteria that was attached to her conversation.
What other inaccuracies have you noted in that report?
In the paragraph that is entitled 7/23/03, 1338 hours.
What page is that on?
Page 4.
What's the number? It's 72303? That's a date?
The date of
right.
7/23/03 at 1338 hours. In the synopsis on page 4, apparently Detective Hallisey was describing a call that I had made, which was pre-scheduled, and according to what is written in this report, he claims that the report was scheduled for 1700 hours, which is obviously 5 p.m. My diary and recollection point to the fact that the call was always scheduled for 5:30.
Did you ever tell him that it was scheduled for 5 o'clock?
No. And he goes on to say that Beninati was unable to verify what time exactly the telephone call was made, which I find odd and inaccurate because I always knew that the call was made at 5:30 because that's when it was scheduled to have been made. There was never any change.
And that's what you had told him to begin with?
That's correct.
What else in the report is inaccurate?
On page 5, the report claims that the calls were made according to the Verizon phone log at 1737 hours, which is a possibility, and the subsequent call was made, no, the first call was made at 1734.
Which would be 5:34.
Yes, and then there was another call made at 5:45. Now, it seems to me a bit odd that, according to what they claim the Verizon phone records to be, that the two calls were logged in at what appears to be 7 minutes. My recollection is that when I hung up the phone, all I did was go to my phone log, check the phone number, and redial the number a second time, which could have been perhaps 1 or 2 minutes, not 7 minutes. And then the other odd piece of this timeline is that Detective Hallisey seemed to intimate that a 911 call was made either immediately before or after Beninati called the house, which just doesn't seem to be accurate. And then he goes on to say, since Beninati was unable to distinguish the disturbances he overheard, and that both phone calls sounded the same to him, I, meaning Detective Hallisey, cannot independently establish Beninati's suspicion that he overheard a domestic disturbance versus a woman who, once awakened by a phone call, found her husband deceased. So in other words, it appears by this document that Detective Hallisey was uncertain of my suspicion, which I find equally odd because I was very aware of what I told Detective Hallisey, and I did not have any indication, hesitance, or inability to recall exactly what happened during that brief span of approximately 4 or 5 minutes.
Did you tell Detective Hallisey that both times that you called, when this woman answered the phone, she was crying?
Yes, I did.
Did Detective Hallisey make any suggestions to you that perhaps what you were hearing was something other than a man screaming in the background?
Again, from my estimation of how interviews like this are conducted, I did not ever get the impression that Detective Hallisey was taking my recollection of the facts seriously. It appeared to me that he had been attempting to put words in my mouth, that perhaps I had been confused over not just the timeline, but I was confused over the fact that there was really a male voice screaming in the background, and he suggested that, he asked me, could it have been a television? Which I responded, perhaps anything is possible, but my experience tells me that this was not a television. The voice sounded like a male voice in another room, and I even told him that it seemed odd that he would even bring this up.
Did you get the impression that Detective Hallisey was trying to get you to change your testimony?
That was the impression I had after that phone call. It was an odd phone call, not what I expected, quite frankly.